Thank you everyone for joining. It does feel like it's the start of a new year, a sort of school year after summer. At least I have that feeling. And I am absolutely thrilled because there's no chance this isn't going to be a really special session. Most of you will have joined because you've heard of or read or seen Laura Storm, who is sort of the epitome of a powerhouse, of a change maker, to my mind. She's focused on transformation and sustainability throughout her career, but not just focused on it, sort of started Copenhagen Climate Council, Sustainia, and then more recently, the Regenerators. She's also a fellow Dane and a mum and someone who I have come to regard as a good friend and sort of co-conspirator as we're on this journey of shifting the system towards regeneration. So I'm thrilled. And we've promised that we won't speak Danish together, even though that's our normal language between us, speak English.
Secret language.
Exactly. So if anybody misbehaves, we'll just switch. And what I realized as I was prepping was that Laura and I share a hell of a lot, excuse my language, of opinions and sort of views on things. So there probably won't be, I might as well disappoint everybody, probably won't be tons of disagreements, but I'm hoping that actually what we'll be able to do is to push deeper into some of the concepts and the thinking and be really helpful to all of you. So I wanted to start there. We're both up for having some fun, so I hope you are too. And just as a side note, before we really kick off, and I'll start with asking Laura questions, is just to note, as you will know, that this is actually a book of two authors, so Laura and Giles Hutchins, and we actually will see Giles in a few months on book club talking about his latest book, Leading by Nature. So we thought it was appropriate we have Laura talking about this one and then Giles down the road. So with that, start. Thank you for joining, Laura. I have to say,
thank you for having me.
Any time. Just let's get it sort of out of the way. My standard question, which is about, well, what is this book about? What would you say, in summary, the key tenets are? I'm sure lots of people will have read it. Some people won't, so we want them to go and read it. So not a full rundown, but what is this? What are we dealing with here?
So Regenerative Leadership, the book, is the kind of vision that Giles and I shared, or the dream that we shared, was to offer something very practical that would allow leaders from all walks of life. So when we mean leaders, we don't just mean executives. We mean that we are all leaders of our life. And how can we lead and live in more regenerative ways? And we wanted to offer something that would make this new emerging field very easy to grasp and understand. We wanted to do some reducing of the complexity, and we wanted to offer something that lends from a plethora of fields like biology, psychology, ecology, physiology, economy, etc., and wanted to bring all of that together in a coherent framework, and in a framework that people could use both in very kind of practical ways, assessing their organization or community or life in terms of how regenerative are they right now at the current state they're in. So you can both use it as a very kind of practical and tangible handbook that can help you on the transition journey towards becoming more regenerative. It can also be an inspiration if you just want to get your head around, what does regeneration mean? And how can I, in my life, start to get my head around understanding how I can create conditions conducive for life to thrive in my area of influence. We talk a lot about how to become an ecosystem facilitator, that instead of controlling machines, you work with bringing life and health and vitality into systems. And regeneration means replenishing, it means healing, and that's what we need in all the areas of society right now. So I hope that answered the question.
Covers it brilliantly. Thank you. We'll get into some of those things a little bit, I think, as we go. Just in terms of sort of the process of the book, you talk about both your sort of transformative shifts, and I wondered whether you talk a little bit about sort of your personal journey of how did you suddenly think, you know, obviously an offering, but high flyer in the sustainability and climate movement for a very long time. And then this book, and then with Giles of all people. So obviously I know your friendship and your vision has such a wonderful overlap, but I'd love to hear a little bit, just your personal journey.
Yeah. So I've kind of had this purpose, I guess you could say, since I was a kid, since I became aware about the destruction that was happening to our beautiful planet. Especially I drew my love towards the Amazon rainforest, and started kids campaigns, and as soon as I was old enough, I went there to work as an environmentalist. That's what I thought would be my kind of path in life, but I quickly got a little impatient. I'm impatient by nature, and wanted to understand, how can I actually disrupt the machine from the inside out? So I studied business, went to London and Copenhagen Business School to understand the machine from the inside out, and then started these various organizations that you talked about in the beginning, which were focusing on, the first one was focusing on what is the business case for a strong global deal? How can we make business leaders all over the world aware about the potential of a successor to the Kyoto Protocol? That was back when we negotiated the Copenhagen process that then ended up being the Paris Treaty. And then Sustainia, that was brought out of a kind of a frustration about the political process not delivering enough. Okay, what can we do about that? How can we revitalize momentum? So I started Sustainia with a mission of making sustainability more accessible, more exciting, more desirable. And we did various kind of events. We mapped solutions and innovations. We also threw big award shows where we actually 1 year had the star John Elkington as the co-host alongside a very influential Danish politician called Ida Augen.
Yeah.
We had Arnold Schwarzenegger there, Gro Harlem Brundtland. It was very much a party celebrating sustainable solutions and innovations. And all was going really well, and I did nothing but work, and I became a mother during that process. And when she was 2 years old, I had a massive injury in my head. I was in an injury, had a minor traumatic brain injury, and couldn't do anything for a few years. And of course, that was a traumatic experience, but it was also an experience that brought me back to who I truly am, that all of that kind of ego disappeared, and suddenly it was just me, the version of Laura who was not able to execute things and launch new ideas. It was a kind of a slower, calmer version of myself. It felt like finding or reconnecting through true authentic self. It was, of course, a crazy experience, and we could talk for hours about that experience alone, but it did lead me back to some experiences I had while being in the Amazon, working alongside shamans, learning from them in terms of the interconnectedness of the web of life, and that approach of seeing yourself as a custodian of our planet, a steward of life, that I had kind of forgotten a little bit about, to be honest. I had forgotten about the importance of having a strong connection to nature. I had forgotten the importance about restoring, replenishing my own inner resources, that inner regeneration that is a prerequisite for outer regeneration. Everything we do and say creates massive energetic ripples as well. And our state of being really influences outer states of being. So with that realization, I went on a kind of a personal explorative process, and I met Giles during a meeting in London. It was a meeting that was trying to help pilgrim cities. So the devastation that pilgrim travels leave behind is a major issue. Over 350 million people are traveling to pilgrim cities all over the world each year, and they are leaving behind a trail of destruction. And Giles and I were both invited in to offer sort of like a regenerative inner sustainability approach to that below the radar gathering of 7 major faiths. And in that process, we just connected, and Giles had been on this journey for longer than I, and this journey, I mean the journey of tapping into the wisdom of life, tapping into the wisdom of nature, and merging that with business. He had written The Nature of Business and the Story of Separation before he and I started collaborating. But we both shared a passion around making regenerative business and regenerative leadership the new norm. So we started to host leadership retreats and workshops and ran processes together. And in that process, the regenerative leadership DNA framework emerged, and the book emerged. Yeah, so that was a long story and a long backdrop as to why I do the work that I do today. It's very much that realization, and having witnessed political processes firsthand, UN processes, and having witnessed many boardrooms talking about their transition to sustainability. 15 years ago, I wrote my thesis on, it was called the barriers to a low carbon economy, and things were just not happening at the scale or at the speed that we needed to. And instead of continuing a conversation around more technology and moving faster, I realized in that 2 years of silence and darkness that what we really need is a new level of consciousness, and a new level of being in the world, a new way of collaborating. Egos and traumas are really running the show to a great degree, and I've witnessed that in political negotiations. I mean, what we saw at the COP15 in Copenhagen was literally heads of states hiding from each other like it was a hide and seek in kindergarten. Those kind of things happen when we allow the ego to take the driver's seat, and instead step back and see, how could we co-create from a space where we have that mindset of being custodians of our planet, being stewards of life, and what would nature do here? I'm gonna stop myself because I think
no, this is fantastic. It's such a wonderful start. I'm thinking, where do we go? Quick one. Let's talk a little bit more. Just that ego piece, which I feel I've seen more and more in the last few years of my career, that especially young people, but everybody, including myself, oh, you should do more about your branding. You should, put that ego further and further ahead. Is it accelerating? Is it decelerating? How do we step away from it when we have to be in certain positions to a certain extent to have the impact we want to have? There
are definitely things shifting and changing, and what I'm witnessing is executives that are breaking open, breaking down, breaking through at a rate I've never seen before. And what I mean by that is the kind of conversations that I'm now able to initiate that would have been unheard of even 5 years ago is accelerating. That willingness to humbly accept that, okay, the corporate ladder that I kind of push my way up towards getting to the top, I need to walk down from that ladder, and I need to enter an area where suddenly I have no clue and I'm the newbie here. I don't have the answers, and I need to go with my heart first and vulnerably asking those that know better help from them. And I need to create an environment where people feel safer. That recognition is increasing, and we see trends right now
Mm.
that are showing to us that both the breakdown and the breakthrough is happening in front of our eyes. So we have trends like the Great Resignation, people quitting their jobs in numbers we've never seen before. Last week we had the blow up that went viral on TikTok about quiet quitting. That whole trend of you may not have left the job yet, but you have just given completely up. You just clock in and out to get paid, but you're not in any way excited, which means that companies lose so much innovation, creativity, resilience when they have merely kind of ghosts working for them. We see stress and burnout at a number as well we've never seen before, never witnessed before. And all those kind of inner dimensions of our organizations, then the interconnectedness of the web of life that they are a part of, the outer dimensions, is also suffering at an extent we've never seen before. And I don't need to go through that in detail here, but we're living through the sixth mass extinction, climate systems breaking down in front of our eyes, and I could go on about numbers and stats here, but I assume people in on this call are aware of this. So there is this mutual breakdown, but there's also a breakthrough that I see as well. A willingness to have the difficult conversation, a willingness to admit to yourself that you don't have all the answers, a willingness to enter uncharted territories, because basically that's what we're all doing. Some have some answers, but no one have all the answers, and you should never trust anyone that say they do.
Exactly.
So we're living through an exciting phase, an exciting time of co-discovery, and something that we need to do together, holding hands, but also going with our hearts first. And that is very exciting. It's very exciting to have these very vulnerable conversations with CEOs that I would not have been able to initiate, even, as I said, just 4 or 5 years ago.
No, and yeah, as you know, we've just discussed this. We are seeing very similar things, and that people are saying, can you help build capacity within our organization? Can you help unlock the insights that people have? Because the forward-thinking CEOs and leadership teams, they know they have to start tapping into something they don't have, right? Because let's be honest, everybody in a leadership position now are leaders in a certain system. And as that ladder or that system is breaking down around us, we've got to come up with something completely new. I want to just circle back to one, otherwise I'll be told off by my colleague Richard. I think we can do it quite quickly. Political process, the role of government, the role of COP in particular. So we came out of COP 26 last year in Glasgow, and on one hand rather disillusioned, but also sort of with the expectations. And Richard wrote a, I think, brilliant article on why the process itself is flawed and will never get us to where we need to. I would just love to hear, just to circle back on that. You presumably agree, having been so close to the Copenhagen process, which was really, really difficult, I think, by all accounts. And then Paris was some light. And then again, 10 years later, or 12 years later, I guess it is. But I don't feel particularly hopeful that Sharm el-Sheikh is going to come up with something new. So thoughts?
No, I have to be honest that I'm a bit torn here, because we can't just give up on political processes. They're still incredibly important. I personally had to kind of take care of my mental health. I had to, after having been to 7 COPs, I had to kind of step back after Paris. Or maybe it was, maybe 9 actually. Anyways, I don't think I can do them anymore, because it's such a circus, but they're still needed. And what I kind of cling on to, the hope I cling on to, is that the more that is happening outside the COPs, that is putting the needed pressure, but also support towards that process, the better. And there we do see things changing, and we do see more and more companies that are finding it relevant to have it on their radar and even attend. or play some kind of role in terms of mobilizing a commitment, a support, etc. But what we have done in the past is to rely too much on these processes, and it's just not going to cut it. It is, as I said, and this is just my point of view. It's a strengthening of a regenerative vision that needs to happen right now. It's a focus on what can we do? How can we create thriving, abundant companies and organizations where where employees are thriving, where they actually want to stay and be committed and engaged and excited and lend their wisdom to benefit the performance of the company. I come across so many wonderful examples of executives leading that regenerative way forward, and that excites me more. That's where I want to put my focus on. But the political process is still incredibly important. But they need to go hand in hand with mobilizing. I see it more as the work that we're doing within making more people aware of the potential of regenerative business. Also offering that kind of fertile soil for politicians to in a more easier way, get the support and the momentum that is needed. Because the more we can make people realize that this is not about philanthropy, this is actually good business, the more support we can also get for legal frameworks.
I want to just dig in one further step. So governments, yes, and I guess for me the highlight of last COP was that mainstreaming, that suddenly there were companies there, and I was having conversations with execs who said, "Oh, I didn't realize this was a big issue, but I was told I had to come to COP. What can I do?" And so the more people who are starting to think in that piece. But I saw that Donna has put in a question: just, do you also see that exciting willingness in the political arena? So we talked about, and I do. Good.
I'm contacted by many political leaders, and again, it's kind of it's below the radar. It's not something that I talk about. I don't mention political parties, but parties in the UK, also US politicians, German politicians, French politicians, Danish politicians, that want to build political programs and offerings around a regenerative mindset, which is incredibly exciting, and that's something that has happened within the past 2 years. But it's really gaining traction. And I find that incredibly exciting.
That is.
I make a big deal out of being politically independent, but I'm willing to lend all that I can to those politicians that are going down that path of how could we become a regenerative kind of beacon? How can we lead the way in such a transition on a national level? I find that incredibly exciting.
Yeah, no, it really, really is. As you say, we live in interesting and very exciting times. Scary, but also all that opportunity and that movement that we see. I'm just going to pick up on Henrik has put in that we've been relying too much on the COP process or that type of governmental processes. Do you also think, and I think I know what the answer is going to be, that we've been relying too much on leaders? And we need, and that leadership role, and you and I have talked about this, that how we think about leaders has to shift from one person.
Definitely. And that's also why I began with saying that I don't see leadership as something that is kind of that's the executives or the politicians or C-level suite. We are all leaders of our lives. We need to take leadership, and we need to reclaim leadership within ourselves, and need to carve out, in my opinion, a regenerative way of living life. And for example, I'm taking right now 300 people through a year-long journey into regenerative leadership. And yes, we do have the executives and kind of those types of people, but we have a lot of designers and architects, school teachers, coaches, consultants that are eager to get their heads around these principles so that they can be regenerative focal points and nodal points, and starting to create these regenerative ripple effects. That's something that I'm a strong believer in, that that we can all create ripple effects wherever we are in our kind of circles of influence, and we should never underestimate that. I have seen so many amazing things from example, one of the people that were on one of my journeys were very kind of devastated because he was working within a very rigid, polluting industry, and he could not see his way out of that. And I suggested that he could start a book club for within the company. So he got permission to buy 20 books, regenerative leadership books, and he started little book clubs inside the company. And what started as a little book club ended up becoming a business proposal to the C-level suite that ended up ending up in an actually changed strategy. So one should never kind of underestimate. It's just me. It's just little me, but it's not little you if you are actually starting to see the power and influence that you have, and also just starting to talk about this among circle of friends, etc., is incredibly powerful.
Perfect. And that actually is a segue into Sophie. Has just I saw a question from Yusuf. What she's saying is, how can we marry that knowledge that a breakdown is inevitable in a corporate hierarchical system? I'm shortening, Soph. That in most instances, that attitude is what gets respect. So how do we start that conversation? So I think the book club is a perfect example. Mm-hmm. How else do we do it? You know, I was thinking about it the other day. So again, like your mum, children, sports field, how do you launch into that? Do you launch into that with parents at the school gates or other times in personal life?
I have promised my daughter to be on my best behavior, not be that kind of activist mom. But yes, it can happen anywhere. It can happen anywhere that we ask those questions in a non-judgmental way. And I think that's incredibly important. I'm done with the shaming and the stigma and the pointed fingers. I'm done with that kind of heavy energy. What we need to do instead is in a kind and compassionate way, open the door to new potential, open the door to a new way of being and a new way of doing things. And you were also pointing towards the fact that you were saying something about when you've had success doing a certain thing, it takes a lot of courage to kind of walk away from that and do things in a different way. And that breakdown is not easy. And I think that also there's something in our society, and maybe that's kind of too woo-woo to talk about here, but I'm going to do it anyways. Oh, sure. There's something about the time that we're navigating right now where we as a collective need to open up towards those inherent fears that we all have. Fears of not belonging, of not being accepted, fears of dying, to be very kind of existential. There's such an ingrained trauma and fear in our society that winters and resting and slowing down and darkness is what we need to fear. And I think the better we can be at surrendering to not knowing and surrendering to the inner winters we may have to navigate, surrendering to the fact that we are all human beings that want to desperately belong. Because part of the reason that we have created this definition of success that is about the position you have, the title, how much money you make, is a deep inner longing of being accepted, of belonging somewhere, of being seen as something special. And it's something that we do need to address in our societies, because it's the trauma that I especially see among C-level executives. That need of being seen, but also the need of not accepting that we're all going to die, and that wintering is part of the cyclical process of life. Indigenous cultures did not fear dying because they saw life as this kind of never-ending process, and of course I understand the fears that we can have towards the darkness and winters and dying, but it's something that we need to at least start. It's conversations that we at least need to start having, because it's right now the main blocks for the kind of radical change that we urgently need if we want to stick around as a species, to be completely honest. And that's a discussion that I don't see happening enough, also in the regenerative space.
Sure.
How do regenerators also learn to let go of their need to be seen and accepted as the inventor of the field or the thought leader? It's something that we all need to kind of loosen the grip with. And I'm very kind of keen on co-creating this new field in a way that is based on principles of collaboration and compassion, and checking in with myself in terms of my own ego, because we all have an ego. But how can we do things in a radical different way?
So I'm just going to throw in, and love and kindness, which everybody on book club hears me talk about quite a lot. It's sort of favorite superpowers. And one of the things that made me smile in the book was like, at the end it says, if we started with love, people would have put it down. And I kind of agree. And yet I think that change, even since 2019, when the book came out, there has been a shift where love and kindness has been more acceptable, weirdly. So I think that's really interesting. I want to dig into to this ego bit and to how to navigate it personally. And we've talked previously quite a lot about it. So you are clearly, for very good reason, in huge demand at the moment. How are you working, personally with your ego and preventing yourself from being sucked into to a whirlwind of stress, etc. I think it might be really helpful for people to have something very, very concrete. I'm happy to share as well, but yes. I know yours is very, very.
This is going to be very concrete, but also kind of slightly, again, a little woo-woo maybe. But I know I have a lot of internal fire, and I need to make sure that I have the element of water, that element of going with the flow, instead of burning myself and my surroundings to the ground by overworking and kind of being too demanding. And so I make sure that my life is a constant dance with the four main elements. So the element of fire needs to be there. That passion needs to be able to come through, or else I would die. But it has to be in a way where it's balanced with the element of water. It has to be grounded. It has to be connected to the element of earth. But it also has to bring in the element of air, so it can actually reach people. I have had to set up a few rules to make sure the fire and the ego doesn't get the better of me. And one of those rules is to not work more than 25 hours a week. And that's a rule because I need time to regenerate. I need time to practice what I preach. I need time spent in nature. Another practice that I have is spending quite a lot in a meditative state. And that before my accident, I had never meditated. And I was kind of annoyed when I was in settings where people were initiating a meditation. I was so kind of high beta, full on type A kind of person that was not a state I could bring myself into.
Yes.
But that has changed. I mean, meditation has become an integrated part of my life now. And what I do is, and again, this is going to sound crazy, but I spend quite a lot of time in a meditative state with the kind of entity of regenerators to take my ego out of it. So what would the energy of regenerators, the energy that it's here to offer the world, what would that do in a certain situation? And it helps me tremendously and it allows me to take Laura out of it, and act accordingly to what that energy would do. That is wiser than I am, and has a lot less ego in it. And I say no a lot, and it's not easy, because having tried to initiate a discussion around regenerative leadership and business for such a long time and being looked at as slightly crazy. I think when I came back after my 2-year kind of in the darkness and started to talk about learning from the wisdom of nature, I think many people was like, she probably hit her head a bit too hard. So suddenly starting to have that openness and people receptive, also big multinationals, you name it, they want to hear about this, and saying no, because no, I need to be true to myself, is a constant dance. And most often I succeed, and then I will have a month like this year, and the month of June was just crazy, and then I took 5-6 weeks off. So it is a constant dance. I will be completely honest, but it's something that I really truly value, so I can be authentic and acting from my integrity, instead of just kind of letting my ego have a ball at this and attention and interest that is suddenly coming towards this field of regenerative leadership and business.
Wonderful. I think that's the thing. I think a lot of us have found it difficult to sit down and meditate, and because it's felt very restraining, at least for me, for years and years and years, until I could figure out other ways of getting, as you say, I think the into a meditative state is a much better explanation, because you can do it in many ways. And actually, to your point, I know you've also done some work with Salesforce. I spent some time at a Buddhist monastery back in end of May, and they go every year to do mindfulness and meditation training with the Salesforce execs in order to that. And that's when you start seeing things flow through. If companies are at least giving the opportunity for people to have less of that ego.
Exactly, because it's about opening your own inner capacity of sensing and responding, that receptivity. And if I have just kind of filled my calendar with things, I'm not open, I'm not receptive, then I'm suddenly controlled by a very kind of strict agenda. And then there's no new creative impulses that can enter my vortex, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And there's a couple in the chat, I can see people are coming up with saying, oh, this is Jungian. Charlene says, that you're making quite a lot of lovely spiritual practice references. Is part of the process for you reconnecting to spirit found in and shared by us and the environment? Is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, I see us all as part of a greater interconnected web of life. We are connected. And I've actually never shared this before, so be kind. But I think I have shared enough about how I was before. And John also met me quite a few times before I had my accident. So I was this very young, driven kind of, I want to have impact in the world and I want to make all these kind of things. And then I had that traumatic experience, which was also very much a gift. And in that darkness, that felt like almost a 2-year-long meditation. And of course it wasn't, but there was a lot of solitude and a lot of silence. And I would kind of get visions, and I would start to kind of see us all as this kind of interconnected mycelium. And that understanding that my inner capacities, my inner quality of life actually does influence this mycelium. We are all cells in a greater organism. And the quality of each individual cell actually does matter. It does matter the kind of energy that we send out into the world. It does matter the kind of conversations that we dare initiate. That the reason that there are many conversations we are not daring to have is out of a fear of not daring to go there with yourself. And you cannot take people anywhere you haven't been yourself or gone yourself. And again, we come back to that notion of fear, right? And fear is something that comes up in everyone I come across. It's the fear of being rejected. I mean, C-level executives that people are celebrating. they in nature, going through these processes, often break down in tears and like, I'm afraid of rejection. I'm afraid of initiating these types of conversation out of fear of being ridiculed, rejected, laughed at. So there's so many people all over the world that are craving and have this collective longing for a new way of relating, a new way of collaborating, a new way of being in the world, but they're holding back out of fear of being rejected, because ultimately that fear of not belonging and not fitting in takes the driver's seat, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's so right. And actually, I haven't shared this. I don't think anybody in my team knows. So I've had this idea for a while of reviving an old, I guess, campaign that ran in Denmark when I was growing up, which was about, I think it was called Smile, It Warms, or Smile, It's Contagious, with little stickers that everybody wore. This idea that actually, if we all acknowledged each other as we walk past each other on the street, we are feeding that need of being seen, of sort of feeling we have an impact in the world. And I have this theory that would actually make a much bigger difference than one might think, if normal people felt seen, because there is that fear. And when you walk down the street, my neighborhood is used to me looking, idiotic with a smile and saying hello to everyone. But I do think that is what builds community, and it helps people like slightly go up the ego. I'm wondering whether there's more in that ego piece to talk about. What do you think? Should we leave it there? I'm saying
there is a lot to unpack, but it's I think, just as a little tip, I think it's important that we become aware in every micro decision that we make, who's running the show here. Is it my need for being celebrated? Is it my need to fit in? Is it my need to show my parents I've accomplished something in life? Is it my need to show the people that bullied me in kindergarten that I've made it in life? What is driving us? And is it making us happy? And is this decision making me happy? Is this decision creating more conditions for life and thriving? Or is it mainly run by my ego? And I think that's a process. And instead of shaming ourselves, it's a process that we could start to have fun with. When we start to notice, because we all have an ego. I mean, none of us, I guess, in this call are Buddhist monks who spent 17 hours a day in meditation, and that is not a dream of mine. So my ego kicks in as well, and I also have that fear. For example, now that this field is really gaining traction, and you have consultants popping up left and right that are regenerative leadership experts, that will my little rule of not working more than 25 hours and spending a lot of time in meditation and nature and with my kids, will that mean that I suddenly miss the train and I won't be able to do what I'm passionate about? Because there are people that are willing to work all the time. Those kind of fears are just kind of basic human fears that we all have, and they are important to sit with. But again, at the end of the day, I know that I will leave myself if I let the fear of missing the train run the show, and I will deplete my inner resources, and I will leave my integrity, and people will sense that, and therefore I choose to believe that the impact that I would then have wouldn't be as impactful as I hopefully have now. I hope people can sense that at least I speak my truth.
I think we can. I'm going to speak for everyone on this call, and I've seen you speak. I think that is, I think that's really clear. And just, we're going to circle back one more time on the saying no, because it's clear that in this society, saying no feels harder than saying yes to everything, partly because of that. And I think Paul asked, do you feel like it gets misinterpreted as being grumpy or Bolshevik? And
yes, and arrogant.
And arrogant, interesting.
And lazy.
Yeah.
It's being translated into all kinds of things, but that's not my responsibility, because that's also a trigger people have, because they have that fear of being seen as lazy or arrogant or Bolshevik or socialist or whatever it may be that they read into this.
And if we get a little bit feminist on this, do you think there's a difference between you as a woman saying no versus a man in this instance? That's a Sophie question. I have to give credit where credit's due. I thought it was a very good one.
There probably is, but I just sense, again, I'm going to be completely honest, I just sense this fatigue around men and women. And I don't mean that, and I don't mean it in a way where we should shy away from having these kinds of conversations. I think it just stems from being annoyed that is still the case. But yes, there is a difference. There is a difference, because then it can also be seen as weak. It can be seen as not being able to kind of and hopefully all of the people that have had close relationships, it's not that they notice that I work less hours, because I only say yes to things that I actually have capacity for. And that's something that I hope we could all be able to do, to only say yes to what you have capacity for, not at full capacity, but at 60-70% capacity. So you still have that margin where new things can come in and you can actually get new ideas, but you can also be kind to your kids, and you can cook dinner, and you can be there at their school activities. And that is important. That those kind of things is something that we need to claim as an important part of being a regenerative human being.
No, absolutely right. And I see Marissa's made a little point that not everybody can afford that, to say no. And I think it's worth mentioning. I don't think it invalidates the point at all, though.
No, and I know that, and I accept that. And I have never been. I don't come from a rich background, and I don't have a husband that offers the kind of support financially. Of course, he contributes, but I would like to challenge it, because I have lived off of very little for a very long time. And I'm not saying everyone is able to do that, but there is some wiggle room if we are able to accept a lower kind of standard of living for a period of time, where we need to do different things or build a new foundation for a new way of living. That's a long conversation, of course, but it's when I say these things, there's often this kind of it's because she's, I don't know, she probably have a rich husband, or I don't know, and that's, I just want to stress that that's definitely not the case.
Fair enough.
It's about how you design your life and what.
Yeah.
And I mean, we live in a tiny rental in the city of Copenhagen. It's not like I live in a big mansion. I would like that to change one day, but it's not my current way of living. It's a little rental, the four of us.
All good. I just a quick one in, because I then want to get back to some of the big macro pieces that you deal with. One of the things that I've found in working with some organizations, and you've sort of said that, woo-woo a couple of times, is that when you say to them, well, could you, let's start here with the personal development piece, or, one of our clients called somebody who's written a lot about regeneration and was told, well, you can't do anything unless you go into the forest and meditate with your leadership team. And he was like, well, then this is not going to happen, because that's not the culture that allows me to do that. And so one of the things that we've been doing quite a lot of is helping people find doorways that work for them and my view, I guess, is that at some point they're going to have to do the inner work, but you can start, if you can get them to do things and work in ways that don't feel frightening and don't feel too woo-woo, so to speak, then you can get them on that journey. Are you seeing that a similar kind of sometimes?
For sure. And I see myself as in many ways, a Trojan horse. And even though I speak my truth, there are different versions of it depending on the audience. So today I'm just kind of completely honest and not really thinking too much about who's actually listening. But it's, of course, when I give a keynote to the pension fund and investment forum, this is not the kind of thing that I would like, that I'm sharing with them. Then I'm sharing the business case for regeneration, how a portfolio could look differently. So it's all about finding that doorway, as you say, that entry point that will make them listen and that will make them take you seriously. That's incredibly important, because otherwise you will be dismissed if that's what you start out with. And I need that too. I need both the kind of the great new regenerative technologies, innovations, the delicious business cases, the new biomimicry examples and innovations and material innovations, etc. I need all those things, but I just from my truth is that we will never succeed at the level needed unless we also dare have the inner dimensions with us on that journey. But we need both. We can't just sit in a circle, and we can't just be on our own out in the forest. We need to bring that wisdom in and roll up our sleeves and start to design cities and build houses in a new way and create products in an entirely new way. But we need that alchemy of both.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's so much so much. I'm looking at questions that have come in and trying to make good sense of it. Let's talk a little bit about the speed we need to experience this change and some of the things. So we've talked about the inner work, and so I think we should take that as a given, but technology, different ways of doing it. So I was very lucky, as you know, a few weeks ago, going to Greenland and experiencing some of the climate change up front and having conversations with people deeply embroiled in Web3 and blockchain and cryptocurrencies, which, as a decentralized technology, could be said, well, maybe this has more potential to set us up for a regenerative system because it's decentralized. And similarly, there's lots of people that think that AI is going to help solve this. What's your view? Because often people land in one camp or the other, saying, well, it's all going to be about technology is going to save us. It's fine. Don't worry too much. Invest in the technology. Or they say, stop. Technology is always going to have quite terrible unintended consequences that
I think I'm in camp both. I think we need all hands on deck, all men on deck, and technology can be such a powerful tool that we need to tap into in this time of transition. We would be, in a way, stupid if we don't tap into that potential. But of course, it's all about the mindset, the level of consciousness behind those technologies. And of course, there's a danger associated with that. But imagine if we used it as a force for good, what potential that would have. So that is definitely my dream, and I'm also kind of trying to get my head better around what does regenerative technologies look like? How can we use them as a force for good? What's the kind of nuts and bolts of that? What does it look like, and how can we start to talk to each other instead of kind of no. The technology landscape are representing the evil guys. We need all hands on deck, and we need to join forces and have that conversation.
Yeah, no, camp both. I like that. I might have a t-shirt. And then sort of laddering back up again, this idea of the individual not quite egoless, but working on being egoless and working on fitting better into the wider system, to the organization, the regenerative business, to government, and so on. We're still, and I think, who was it? Was it Donna again? I think so. Great questions, Donna. Who are looking at, well, can we do this if GDP is still the measure of national success? How do we create that pincer movement from individual and to political processes?
Where I have landed with this right now, and it can change, but of course this is something that is often in the back of my mind. It's part of it's a constant dilemma and challenge. And right now I do my best to focus on inspiring the imaginal selves of our collective right now. So just for those that don't know that kind of biological metaphor, that the imaginal cells are the cells within the caterpillar that have the evolutionary potential of being a butterfly, and they, in the darkness of the cocoon phase, they become awake and they start to merge into imaginal groupings, and slowly but surely a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly. And right now I focus on inspiring these imaginal cells and trying my best to bring them together in a hope that once we reach the tipping point, we will realize that GDP, I mean, the way that we measure that right now is destructive, and we need a new way of measuring that. It will be so obvious once we start to reach the tipping point. But if that's a discussion that we start to have intensively right now, I would fear it's too soon, that we still need more nurtured soil. We still need larger and more global imaginal groupings for that conversation to really have an impact. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, I think it's that. And I know Kevin, who I saw on the call earlier, is let's not bother with the people who are not there yet. Let's create a bigger group of imaginal cells that have the capacity to spread, and we talked about ripples earlier.
Yeah.
So I completely agree. Just on that GDP point, there's something about I guess that reductionist, which is very mechanistic, right? We are set up at the moment to want to put everything in a spreadsheet and be able to measure it quite specifically, where, and yet everybody knows the GDP and other measures don't really account for the things that are most important in life. And yet the sustainability industry, so to speak, that I guess both you and I have been a part of for a while, have been very, very obsessed with measurement. Do we need to do a backtrack as an industry? Obviously, there are things we need to measure. We needed to know what emissions looked like. We needed to know what the ice melting in Greenland was and what the effects would be, and so on. But there's something very reductionist about that whole piece that doesn't sit well with me when I think about regeneration.
Yeah. And again, you are pinpointing one of my fears. One of my fears is that we become so caught up with measuring that we again have these, we get tunnel vision and we are in silos and we don't see the forest for the trees because we become obsessed with the numbers. And we have such a short time. But again, I think my answer would be a bit of can both, in terms of if we just dismiss them, that's not the right route either, right? It's of course about what we are measuring, and also that the field of sustainability consultants become better at having this more holistic, systemic, interconnected approach into this, so that they are offering not an either this or that, but a both and process and offering, and are stressing the importance of the inner health and vitality of an organization, for example, and are offering regenerative approaches and solutions, and are opening their eyes instead of shutting them and closing them and owning in on measuring very certain things. So that would be my hope, that we manage to do a bit of both, and that we educate the god of sustainability consultants into not selling the measurement dogma or paradigm only, but are doing it in a way where they dare to weave in other approaches as well.
Yeah. No. Yeah, and it is just interesting, right? Because it feels like we have to fight against ourselves. To be in that camp both. I am definitely buying you a t-shirt that says that. Great. The just looking at time. Oh, we've still got time for more questions, guys. This is good. Where are we going to go? Where should we go? Other ways. So we talked a little bit about technology and the potential role. What else do you think, without rehashing, I guess, where else are the accelerators? How do we really push this? Is this in teaching people, from school age, that how to trust their inner connection, or their gut, if we want, rather than trust their little sort of voice of fear inside? Where are you seeing sort of bigger intervention points or acupuncture?
Yeah, I think it's in having these kinds of conversations and sowing seeds in also unconventional areas. Yesterday, I had a conversation with Joost de Blok, who is the founder and CEO of Buurtzorg. Yeah. Maybe some of you have heard about them. They became relatively famous in leadership circles when Frederic Laloux had written his Reinventing Organizations. We also use them as a case in regenerative leadership. And he's a great example of a way of being a focal point, because what he has done is not only to disrupt the healthcare industry in the Netherlands, it's also to initiate important conversations in not just the Dutch government, but also he is being brought in as an advisor to the French government, the German government. He's invited in for discussions in IT sectors, in education sectors, because it's also what he has brought to the table is the fact that we need to completely radically change the world of education, because we are not teaching the next generation. We are not equipping them with the skill sets and the capacities needed to navigate the world of today. So how can we revolutionize the education sector and focus more on nurturing the individual talents, nurturing each individual, because then we will have a stronger collective, and we will have that inbuilt resilience into our societies if we manage to nurture individuals instead of forcing them into boxes they don't belong, creating a lot of trauma if you can't fit into that box, and also sapping our societies of that potent life force energy when everyone has spent so much time trying to fit into a box instead of tapping into their unique potential, their unique gifts and creative life force.
Yes.
So he is a great example of someone that is creating massive ripple effects and are really helping speed up this movement. And I think we can all do that to some extent in again our circles of influence. We can start to have these discussions. We can start to collect the great cases and make people aware about that. It's all about making people aware about the fact that there's another alternative. And Buurtzorg is such a powerful case because they have grown from being 3 nurses that wanted to revolutionize the healthcare industry in 2005 to now being 15,000 employees. And they have scaled to other countries. They're being studied all over the world. They have reduced costs with 68% according to benchmark. They have improved profitability with 40% again according to benchmark. But they have also that way of tapping into the collective intelligence, listening to the field, sensing and responding. has meant that that Buurtzorg has spun off into 15 other sectors, like the ET sector, catering, physiotherapy, etc., and more will continue to come because they grow as an organism and they change and they respond to challenges in the market, but also sense into new opportunities. And we can learn from them and we can help scale that kind of thinking. But it requires that willingness to listen, and that it requires that willingness to shed everything we have learned that is so ingrained in our way of operating, and learn anew by reconnecting to, in many ways, at the end of the day, indigenous wisdom. But thankfully, there are people like Joost Blok and many others out there that we can learn from and be inspired by.
Yeah, no, wonderful. And interestingly, so back into, letting everything go. One way, and I think there's a question on this somewhere. One way is sort of civil disobedience. And I think it was Paul who talked about, should we have regenerative strikes? And somebody else, maybe Donna, talking about sort of Extinction Rebellion. What do you think the role is of those kind of fairly extreme measures by very normal people in showing that we can actually give it up? We can not be afraid of getting arrested if there is a greater impact to be had, etc. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is going to be an accelerator? Has it been an accelerator already in terms of all the trends we started off by talking about?
Mm-hmm. To some extent, yes. I do think that a young woman like Greta Thunberg has had a massive impact, and she has inspired many people, and she has succeeded speaking her truth to power in a way where they actually started to listen in a new way. But I think it's important to say that there is not one strict recipe. It's all about each of us finding into our unique essence. Yes. What am I here to do? What is my way of bringing forth this new paradigm? And what speaks to my talent and my superpowers, and then having the courage to act on that. And if that's civil disobedience or whatever shape and form it comes in, then that's what you need to listen to. But it's not a one size fits all. There's no recipe. There's no kind of 10-step process.
So let me just extend that question a little bit, because John asked a question quite early on, and I've held on to it, John, apologies, on what would you advise Greta and her generation to do next? What's the next? Do you see a next stage as a general, having just said there's no one size fits all?
Yeah, and I think we are actually starting to see that in terms of more and more of people from the next generations are kind of committing themselves to only work for companies that have a sustainable profile. I think the last study that I came across was 60% of millennials and Gen Z who only want to work, 64% only want to work for a company that is sustainable. That's one trend. Another trend are those that we've talked about already, about quiet quitting, about the Great Resignation, those kind of signs that are showing that people are not putting up with this anymore. They want a new way forward, and they may not be a Greta Thunberg. It's also okay to not be that idealistic, but to be someone who's craving decency and desiring to work for a company where they are treated well. So the power is also in the small decisions. We are investors on a daily basis. We invest our time in the kind of companies that we want to see more of. We invest our money in, again, the kind of companies and products that we want to see in this world. We are all micro investors on a daily basis, and that is the next steps for the next generation, supported by our generations and those that came before us, that we all need to see ourselves as investors. And sometimes those kind of actions speaks a lot louder than yelling.
Yes, great answer, thank you. And with your own children, remind me how old they are again now? Or
3 and 9.
3 and 9, so it's fairly young. But how are you secretly, when you're not being an activist mum at the school gates, are you secretly helping them integrate some of these practices? Because those who haven't read the book, there's a whole toolkit that with lots of practices you can pick up and learn. And I was thinking about when I was reading it, how do you take that to your family?
My daughter is now 9, so she's of an age where she's starting to be quite sophisticated in her thinking. It's a very interesting age, and sometimes I have those kind of moments where I'm like cringing because she is educating her school teachers or parents to her friends, etc. And I'm catching myself being, and have I been too preachy in my parenting? That's something that I'm still trying to figure out. So there's that part about just making them aware about things, but in a way where, and that's something that is very alive for me right now. How can I do it in a way where she's not passing on judgment and shame, but inviting in another kind of conversation? But then it's also about, we spend a lot of time in nature. Unfortunately, we no longer live in nature on a Portuguese permaculture farm. We are back in the city now. But thankfully, we live very close to a nature reserve. So it's also about instilling in them this love for nature and this understanding that we are part of a greater interconnected web of life. And what does that mean? What stories do you tell your children? What fairy tales do you take them on? Roxy and I, my daughter, are co-creating a book right now where we tell stories about where we try to create a children's story about a young, powerful young woman or young girl who wanna bring her superpowers in and radically change this planet that she has arrived on, to be in tune with this wisdom of life, and that can be a fun kind of creative way of doing it. But I wouldn't say that I'm a parenting expert. I probably make a ton of mistakes. So it's more about, I think, what the thing that is most pressing to me right now is that, again, fear that should I just take them out of school and buy land and teach them to live off the land? Is that the right parenting thing to do right now? And again, right now I'm in camp both, that they do need those kind of skills of society as well, but how can I infuse another way of being as well? But I definitely have this fear in me that we have no clue. None of us have a clue about how the world will look like in 30 years' time, and what skills and capacities do we need to nurture within them to be able to navigate this completely uncertain, unreal time that we are navigating towards. I don't have the answer.
No, I know. It's great thinking though, and I think we're all feeling that, right? You don't want to take them out of a system that's still there, and disable them, and yet you know that it's not going to be there. It can't be there as they grow up. Good. Actually, one that's, I'm going to twist it so it's related to what you just said. How I think Manuel said it. How can you know when you are acting for your own good, not from a sort of selfish point of view? For example, your 25 hours a week, and again, how might we teach? And I'm going to just use children. How might we teach children to know that? How might we teach ourselves to check in?
It's the process that I kind of try to teach my kids is that life is constantly ebbing and flowing and oscillating between summer and winter. And if we want to have the energetic reservoirs or reserves to be in summer in a way where it actually feels good to us, then we also need to replenish and nourish and cater to our soil and our inner being, and going through a little mini winter. And that needs to happen on a daily basis. So we need to retreat for us to be able to also be in our full energy and actually have fun without collapsing. And my youngest just turned 3, so there's a lot of toddler tantrums there, but they are less when we do that, when we are making sure that he's retreating and he has kind of quiet time, and he no longer naps during the day. But it's still important that all of us, also us adults, take time to retreat. I make an effort to make sure that each of my days have the energy of all 4 seasons, so there can be that kind of excited energy of spring and that kind of productive phase of summer and focus phase of summer. But there also need to come that inward energy where I take a quiet break, I meditate, I do some restorative yoga, or I turn to nature. And I have done this for so many years now that I know that I'm way more productive at the end. The bottom line is more productivity when I remember to do that. And that's something we can instill in our kids as just a natural way of navigating life without the shame around needed that introverted time. I'm incredibly I'm kind of like a high sensitive person and incredibly introverted. Many people are surprised by that because I live off standing on stages, being a keynote speaker, but I'm incredibly introverted. So I know for me to feel good when I'm on stage and be in full energy, I need to be okay retreating. And my daughter is the same. She needs to be fully accepted as the introvert she is. We have a lot of stigma around being shy or introverted or having that need to retreat. There has been a lot of focus in my upbringing, or a lot of shame around having that need and not being that kind of extrovert, charismatic person. So that's another part of that acceptance piece, and reclaiming who we truly are and daring to show the world that. So that's something that we talk a lot about, especially now where she's 9 and have that kind of understanding of the world she's navigating. She can see she's a bit different and she has that kind of nature in her, but how does she navigate that in a way where she has a lot of love for herself?
No, absolutely. And I think with the current situation with social media, that need to be extroverted seems to have been amplified. I've seen that in my children for sure. And I think that's it with parenting, isn't it? It's helping the navigation of strengths, characteristics, and weaknesses is all we can do for our children.
Also about, just very quickly, it also takes up quite a big piece in the DNA model of regenerative leadership and business, but it's such a fundamental part of life to understand how we create the right conditions for emergence. For us to create the right conditions for emergence and flow, we need to be alchemists of that oscillating dance between the polarities of divergence and convergence. So where divergence is that kind of energy where we are out exploring, experimenting, throwing hackathons, getting a lot of input and feedback, working with external consultants. If we stay in that divergent energy, we become all over the place and we become too scattered. For us to be in flow and actually have new inventions, products, or ideas emerge, we need that consolidating energy of convergence, that more kind of yin energy where we are consolidating and grounding and filtering out what's not needed. And that's just an important piece to have in the back of our minds. How can we navigate meetings and prototyping and processes in a way where we are respectfully and humbly giving equal attention to both energies, if that makes sense?
It totally makes sense. I've got in my head that your next book could be not a book, but a how to manage time and how to manage your energy through a day. I think lots and lots of people would love that. On that note, actually, do you still have spaces in your next regenerative leadership 1-year journey in case anybody here is interested?
So on November 1st, we open up registrations for the 2023 edition. For those that are interested, there's more info to be found on regenerators.academy. if anyone is interested. So we have 300 spots for that journey. So that's a year-long journey where we have tomorrow. I'm inviting in quite a lot of guest speakers, so people get exposed to a plethora of experts and thinkers. And tomorrow we have John Fullerton, who's a great thinker, and he focuses a lot. He brings 25 years of experience from Wall Street, JP Morgan. He had his own breakdown and breakthrough process, and we share many similarities there. And he was actually at the award ceremony at the Royal Theatre in Copenhagen, where John Elkington was performing as the host. So that's a nice little synchronicity. Anyways, he's speaking tomorrow, and then John is speaking at the end of September, which I'm looking very much forward to.
No, yeah, it would be brilliant. I highly recommend it. I can see Sophie has posted in the chat if anybody would like to be there. Oh, and Carrie is part of that journey already. So Carrie Norton, who's one of the regulars. Wonderful, Carrie. There we go. Brilliant. I wonder whether we've got 5 minutes left. Maybe we just circle back. We've talked about ego, we've talked about organizations, we've talked about love. I wonder whether we just sort of...
Something that I really want to say.
Yeah, go on.
And I loved the quality of these sharings, even though there will probably maybe be some, I don't know if you've heard the concept of vulnerability hangover, but I can set that aside. But something that I do want to say, because even though it's incredibly important, all of these things that we have talked about today, and I firmly believe that is what's standing in our way, that fear of surrendering to not knowing, the fear of letting go of ego, the fear of chartering unknown waters, etc., etc. I just wanted to make sure that everyone on this call knew about a very kind of practical part of the book, which is the DNA assessment tool. So if you think kind of embarking on a regenerative journey is very overwhelming, we have tried our best to make it very accessible. So there's actually in the book an assessment you could make that gives you an overview as to where your community, your company, organization, startup, whatever, to what extent it's regenerative right now. And it gives you a very kind of visual, tangible input and insight into the field of regenerative business and leadership. And I just wanted to make sure that I had said that as well, because we need both. We both need the kind of then we need to cater to the left brain hemisphere, which craves kind of a bit of structure and a bit of kind of that's our logic sense. That's kind of how can we grasp this, and then we need our right brain hemisphere that is bringing in that creative superpowers that we so urgently need right now, and which has been very poorly nourished over the past many decades. It's in such a kind of poor state right now, and something that we need to focus on. How can we nourish our creative superpowers? But we do need both. We need the business cases, and we need the sitting in darkness and catering to our ego.
Perfect place to end. Thank you so much. It's flown by, as always.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure. I hope people have found it worth their time. And thank you so much to everyone for showing up and spending this time with us. And thank you so much, Louise, for all the wonderful work that you do. Thank you so much for helping John so his amazing superpowers can flourish. And thank you, John, for being the masculine version of Gro Harlem Brundtland.